In fact, this incorrect reading of the citizenship clause cannot explain the exception to the birthright citizenship foreign sovereigns and their ministers. What if you're just a foreign ambassador? You come over here for a week, you and your wife drop a baby here, automatically a kid, a citizen? No, that's not how it works.
On November 21st, 2022, the D.C. government enacted the Local Resident Voting Rights Amendment Act, permitting non-citizen residents to vote in D.C. local elections.
I think it's incredibly derogatory to accuse nearly 80 million Americans of mental illness. The last time I checked, Jasmine Crockett couldn't dream of winning such a majority of the public as President Trump did.
Birthright citizenship is supposed to be for American citizens, not illegal aliens who have invaded our country. This is from the DOJ and Marco Rubio, who's gotten sued as a defendant by the Asian Pacific American Advocates, the OCA organization, amongst others, on this issue over the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship. If you're here in this country and you are not a citizen and you're here illegally, or if you're here temporarily and you have a baby, does that make your baby automatically a citizen of the country because they're subject to the jurisdiction thereof? Rubio says no, it doesn't. And he submitted this motion to dismiss the lawsuit brought against him, saying, first of all, these Asian Pacific American Advocates, the APAs, they don't have standing, by the way, and all of the 14th Amendment jurisprudence is wrong, has been misinterpreted, and actually says that it only applies to lawful permanent residents. Here is what came down from the DOJ, happening in the District of Columbia, writing the following. All right, Judge, from Trump's DOJ in a motion to dismiss or to win the case via summary judgment. Your Honor, the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment says this: all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the states wherein they reside. 14th Amendment, Section 1, this is the key phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Trump won. January 20th, Trump came in and said, actually, here's what the meaning of that phrase is. It recognizes that the Constitution does not actually, via the 14th Amendment, grant birthright citizenship to the children of non-citizens who are unlawfully present in the United States, okay? So that's one. So if you're in one bucket, you're here illegally, or if you're a non-citizen and you're here temporarily, right? So like on a visa, some other temporary thing. If you're a lawful permanent resident with a green card, or you've got, like a parent who's here and you're lawfully here, not in violation of federal law, then you would count as having birthright citizenship. Explaining, text, history, and precedent support what common sense compels. The Constitution does not harbor a windfall clause. You don't get to break into our country and then pop out a baby and gain a windfall to those who have circumvented or outright defied federal immigration laws. And there's a whole concept called birth tourism, where people from China will send a pregnant mom over to the United States, plop a baby out, boom, that kid has American citizenship. Plaintiff is Asian Pacific American Advocates. It's a nonprofit organization, probably fueled by some USAID money or whatever, filed on January 31st, 11 days after Trump issued his order. He said, this is illegal. We want our kids to be automatic citizens. Nor, they say, first of all, they don't even have standing, all right? Their dramatic assertions about Trump's order can't substitute for any standing. Like, they can say whatever they want about this order and be upset about it, but that doesn't mean they have any harm that's happened to them as a representative body or an organizational body, so they have no standing. They also haven't established that they're entitled to a declaration that the executive order is unconstitutional. And so if you just look at their complaint, it's so bad that we should win. There should be summary judgment granted to the DOJ because it's pretty clear. As was apparent at the time of its enactment, the citizenship clause in the 14th Amendment, subject to the jurisdiction, contemplates something much more than just being subject to the regulatory power. They said, well, we are subject to the jurisdiction. Like, we come in here, we have to follow your laws. You didn't follow the laws when you came in. That's why you came in illegally. So because we can put you in jail doesn't mean that you have subjected yourself voluntarily to our jurisdiction and that we've entered into that agreement. It conveys that persons must be completely subject to the political jurisdiction. That's what it meant. Have a direct and immediate allegiance to this country, unqualified by an allegiance to some other foreign power. Part of the situation was we didn't want stateless babies. Like, we we didn't want people having babies that didn't have a state, that didn't have a country. They do. They've got their home countries now, right? This was a different time where they were still in this expansionist territory, right? The Mexicans didn't even declare their independence until like 1812. So like there's a lot going on. This is back in 1884. It was when this case came out. Now, just as that does not hold for children of diplomats or occupying enemies, it similarly does not hold for children of foreigners who were here temporarily, right? They're fleshing all this out in the aftermath of the 14th Amendment, which came out right after the Civil War. Now, although the NGO or nonprofit organization, although they say the executive order upends well-settled law, it is their reading that is overly broad that conflates the law. Not only is it inconsistent with the Supreme Court, in fact, the children of tribal Indians did not fall within the clause, right? Children of tribal Indians are not subject to the jurisdiction in the same way because they're subject to the jurisdiction of their tribe, even though they were subject to the regulatory powers of the United States. But it would still render the Civil Rights Act also unconstitutional just 2 years after it passed, because the Civil Rights Act said citizenship was covering those born in the United States not subject to any foreign power. So that Civil Rights Act of 1866 then got essentially codified into the 14th Amendment. The Citizenship Clause of the 14th was an effort to constitutionalize that, put it in the Constitution. So then they rely on Wong Kim Ark, another case which came after the Elk case, after 1898. The court there, which we've read here, was careful to cabin its holding to actual children of those with a permanent domicile and residence, right? Wong Kim Ark, his parents were from China, but they were living lawfully in California. He was born, he got citizenship because they weren't going back home, they were here permanently. Reading that decision to leave open the question is here, right? You could say it's an open question. So in the background, we know Trump issued the executive order. Trump said those two categories are, again, not citizens by operation of law. Now, as for enforcement, it directs the heads of all federal agencies to issue public guidance and create the enforcement rules. January 30th, they sued, saying, how dare you? And so since they're going to lose, we're filing a motion to dismiss. And here are the bases for motions to dismiss. They say, the court, you should dismiss this because they lack standing. They have to meet certain requirements to have standing, and they don't. This organization cannot establish standing because they want to vindicate their own preferences. There has to be a harm. Here, they failed. Nothing in the complaint supports the conclusion that this is impairing their ability to provide services to their constituency. Any attempt for them to have representational standing also fares no better. They're going to lose that too. So they should be just laughed out of here. But also, the president should also be dismissed from this. You don't have the jurisdiction to enjoin the president. You're not a supreme branch of government that overrides the presidency. And you failed to state a claim. None of these counts are even sufficient. You're trying to sue under the APA. All of this is not even a valid claim. This type of review is not allowed for these types of claims. You can sue in other mechanisms, using other mechanisms and other provisions, and we should win via summary judgment. Now, even assuming you've got standing or jurisdiction here, we should still win. The citizenship clause is very clear. It says subject to the jurisdiction thereof. We have met the constitutional provisions. Jurisdiction does not refer to regulatory power. The term jurisdiction should not be interpreted to conflict with other precedents. For example, the Supreme Court has held that children of members of Indian tribes owing immediate allegiance to those tribes are not citizens by birth, but members of Indian tribes and their children are plainly subject to the regulatory power of the United States. You can't just go do whatever you want and break laws in America and just say, well, I'm sorry, I'm an Indian, I'm a Native American, and you're separate. So yeah, we can regulate, but you're not a citizen here. Now, it is thoroughly established that Congress has plenary authority over the Indians and their tribal relations. Congress may regulate Indian commercial activities and Indian adoptions, and the United States, there it is, may punish Indians for crimes. If the term subject to the jurisdiction means you're just subject to the law, then all of those cases, right, this case and 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 this case, which say that the Indians have some modicum of separation and have some recognition of their own tribes, would all be erased. In fact, this incorrect reading of the citizenship clause cannot explain the exception to the birthright citizenship foreign sovereigns and their ministers. What if you're just a foreign ambassador? You come over here for a week, you and your wife drop a baby here, automatically a kid, a citizen? No, that's not how it works. Although foreign leaders and diplomats have traditionally enjoyed immunity, the Constitution allows Congress to abrogate that immunity or to make exceptions. And to the extent that they argue that children of foreign leaders are not subject to the jurisdiction, their theory would allow Congress to turn the citizenship clause on and off. And because the United States is sovereign over its territory, everyone who is born and so present would be subject to some regulatory authority. And so jurisdiction is not regulatory authority. It means allegiance, and you're under the protection of the country. That allegiance must be direct, immediate, complete, unqualified by any allegiance to any other country. They're here waving around their Mexican flags and Guatemalan flags. That has a lot of background, okay? Months before Congress passed the 14th, we had the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The act served as the blueprint for the 14th Amendment. The act said all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, excluding Indians not taxed, are citizens, are hereby declared. There's no reason to read the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof as broader than that. Anything broader than just not subject to the jurisdiction of a foreign power. Even debates on this shared this same understanding. In fact, during the time in 1866, Senator Lyman Trumbull explained, well, this was the purpose of this was to make citizens of everybody born in the United States who owed allegiance to the United States. Just coming after a civil war. Trumbull went on to equate being subject to our jurisdiction as owing allegiance solely to the United States. Even Johnson, Senator Johnson, Reverendy, agreed. Although that this amendment provides, all that it provides is that all persons born in the United States and not subject to some foreign power shall be considered citizens. And this is logical. Under the common law, a person owes allegiance to a country where they're domiciled, and a person domiciled in a country owes allegiance to the country. And that's what we're talking about in Wong Kim Ark. Temporary visitors and unlawful present non-citizens are not domiciled here. They are domiciled in foreign countries. The domicile of an individual is his true, fixed, and permanent home. That's what we saw in Wong Kim Ark. That's what Trump's executive order was based upon. The 14th Amendment and its historical background provides additional support for this conclusion, saying while children born here of U.S. citizens and permanent residents are entitled to birthright citizenship, children of parents whose presence is either unlawful or lawful but temporary or not. Two things have to occur to create citizenship. One, birth locally within the dominion of the sovereign, and secondly, within the allegiance of the sovereign. So geographically inside and politically allied with the nation state. Now, the phrase born in the United States codifies the traditional requirement of birth within the territory, part one. Part two, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, talks about the allegiance. It matches the common law. And everybody, even during the congressional debates, understood it that way. You don't get to break the law and then get a benefit of this. During the debate, this guy, Wade, was also talking about it. Supreme Court in New Jersey, back in 1895, said the same thing, linked birthright citizenship to domicile from the parent. And it's been contemplated a lot, but it's just been interpreted inappropriately right now until Trump came in and said no more of this. The government's reading of the citizenship clause respects the principle that we just discussed, and their reading violates it. As a sovereign nation, the United States has a constitutional power to forbid the entrance of foreigners within its dominion, and the Supreme Court has resisted reading this in a manner that would inhibit the ability to address this dual nationality. And we do tolerate dual citizenship in some situations. We probably shouldn't. Plaintiffs' readings of this invites much broader problems, and so we should win. Wong Kim Ark gives us the case law that we need. Domiciled and residents in the United States. Wong Kim Ark's parents were lawfully here permanently. And so if you just review the relevant history, you can reach the same conclusions. About a decade after Wong Kim Ark was decided, the DOJ likewise explained the decision goes no further than addressing children of foreigners domiciled in the United States. Is the mere act of birth of a child on American soil enough for citizenship? Even the DOJ said it was not held in Wong Kim Ark. It's not how it works. So all of their other arguments failed, and their precedent is bad. In short, Trump's executive order says the citizenship clause means subject to the jurisdiction thereof, which means lawful or permanent status. Therefore, assuming that they have standing and can even bring this properly, you should grant summary judgment to us. So either dismiss the case and we win, or grant summary judgment and we win. Signed by the Assistant U.S. Attorney out there for the Civil Division in Washington, D.C., Heather Graham Oliver. Nice filing in a motion to dismiss. And so we got James Comer, who's also working on this in Washington, D.C., and he says illegals should not be allowed to vote in Washington, D.C. Apparently they can.
I rise in support of H.R. 884, which prohibits individuals who are not citizens of the United States from voting in elections in the District of Columbia. On November 21st, 2022, the D.C. government enacted the Local Resident Voting Rights Amendment Act, permitting non-citizen residents to vote in D.C. local elections. This includes
Okay, we talked about it. Like they're hiring them as cops, hiring them in various, administrative positions, like as ALJ, like administrative law judges in certain locations, giving them the right to vote in certain city elections. Now, in the state capitol, non-citizens can go and run Washington, D.C. Incredible.
Legal immigrants and even foreign diplomats whose interests may be opposed to the interests of Americans. This radical change to Washington, D.C.'s election laws upset lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. For instance, Washington, D.C. Mayor Bowser advisor withheld her signature on the act, something she has done only a handful of times. In last Congress, when an identical bill was brought to the floor, 262 members voted in favor, including 52 of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Unfortunately, the Senate refused to take up this bipartisan common sense bill to maintain election integrity in our nation's capital. The right to vote is a defining privilege of American citizenship. Diluting that right by extending it to non-citizens, whether here legally or illegally, undermines the voice of Washington, D.C. residents. Article 1 of the Constitution grants Congress exclusive jurisdiction over the nation's capital, and the House Oversight Committee is charged with ensuring responsible governance in the district, including its election laws. I urge my colleagues to support Representative August Pfluger's bill to restore common sense protection and ensure that only United States citizens have the right to vote in local D.C. elections. I reserve the balance of my time.
Crazy that this is even a debate. It's like in D.C., they want foreigners to run the government. Okay, so should they just become president too and just eliminate the natural born requirement? Now here's Homeland telling us that under the Biden administration, the political scheme that they were operating allowed hundreds of thousands of unvetted, so not only the people who came in illegally, but they brought them in, unvetted aliens to circumvent the traditional parole process. Known terrorists, gang members, convicted murderers have all entered this country legally under the program. So there were illegals, and then Joe Biden brought in criminals legally. USCIS has lifted the administrative hold that was placed on asylum, TPS, and adjustment of status applications filed by aliens who were paroled, and telling everybody who's here illegally, if you're here, leave now, use the app, and get out. Now, Caroline Leavitt was asked about the Democrat response to a lot of what Trump is doing, and Jasmine Crockett came up today. Here's how Caroline Leavitt explained her thoughts on Jasmine Crockett.
Really quick on Jasmine Crockett, she said, I believe that Trump supporters are mentally ill before calling for bipartisan support against the president. Can you respond to that, especially considering she's a rising star in the Democrat Party right now?
She is a rising star. It's quite something to behold, actually. I hope that she continues to be a rising star for the Republican Party, at least. I think it's incredibly derogatory to accuse nearly 80 million Americans of mental illness. The last time I checked, Jasmine Crockett couldn't dream of winning such a majority of the public as President Trump did. And the America First movement, which President Trump has built, is filled of hardworking patriots, the forgotten men and women, business owners, law enforcement officers, nurses and teachers, and middle America, as we all know, from where you all grew up, outside of this beltway. That's who makes up this president's movement. And Jasmine Crockett should go to a Trump rally sometime and she can see it for herself.
She should. She might put on a MAGA hat and join us, but that's unlikely. So audio was a little low on that. My apologies, but we heard what Caroline had to say. Now, elsewhere, we had Tom Homan out explaining, we're going to continue to round up illegals. Don't you even worry about it.
Well, I don't think it's much reversal, Stuart. What I think the status is right now is we continue operations on farms and hotels. However, we do it in a prioritized manner. A lot of worksite enforcement operations are based on criminal information, criminal investigations, such as forced labor, such as trafficking, such as, tax fraud and money laundering. So we'll still do these operations, but they're going to be based on priority, just like our at-large criminal operations based on priority. Criminals first, national security threats first, but when it comes to hotels and worksite enforcement operations, we prioritize them and put the criminal operations first. So they're not off the table, especially when it comes to a criminal investigation.
All right, Tom Homan, I got one more from him. Here's what he said.
No, it doesn't worry me. I mean, the president got elected on two things, securing the border and running the deportation operation. Historic, and look, we can't send a message to the whole world. You can enter this country legally, which is a crime. You can have your hearing at great taxpayer expense and lose and get an order removal. But don't worry, we're not looking for you. If that's the message we send to the whole world, you're never going to fix the immigration problem. There has to be consequences. We gave millions of people due process under Joe Biden. Let millions of people in. They said, I demand due process. I demand to see a judge. And they had that right. But 90% of them lost. So the immigration judge says, you lose, you must go home. If we don't execute those orders, Stuart, then what the hell are we doing? You might as well shut down the immigration court because the immigration court doesn't mean anything anymore.
Open the border.
Take the border patrol off the border because there's no consequences. We're national laws. We got to enforce those laws.
That's what they want. They don't want America to be America anymore. And if you flood America with foreigners from all over the world, then it's no longer America. It's now this melting pot, which was a made-up term invented in the early 1900s. That is ridiculous. We don't want a melting pot of a bunch of people around the world. We want America. Pure ingredients. So come in and join our values or don't.